For over 130 years, Jack the Ripper has towered above history, a name etched in blood across the dark alleys of Victorian London. But in 2025, a shocking new theory shook headlines around the globe. Experts claim the case has now been solved. Based on DNA testing, ancient records, and forensic investigation, all the evidence points to one individual, Aaron Kosminski, a disturbed Polish barber with a sinister and shady history. But is this finally the end to the Ripper enigma? Or the opening chapter to a book filled with uncertainty and argument? Here, we analyze the explosive new evidence, backlash it generated, and the reasons why the truth could prove to be even more disturbing than the legend. During autumn 1888, the fog-shrouded, cramped streets of Whitechapel, a poor area in East London, were the site of one of history's most gruesome sprees of killing. 5 women were callously murdered under the cover of darkness. Their names, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, are remembered today as the canonical 5. They were all murdered with cold deliberation, their bodies mutilated, some of them with organs taken out. The brutality indicated a killer not only ruthless but methodical as well. London in those days was a city of extreme contrasts. There was unimaginable wealth lying alongside terrible poverty. In Whitechapel, desperation reigned, crime, illness, and crowding were a normal part of life. Against this dismal background, the killings hit like a thunderbolt. These were no meaningless acts of violence. The careful nature of the crimes, their increasing savagery, and their close proximity to each other indicated something purposeful. This was no chaos but a calculated ritual. This was no madman running out of control. This was a killer, honing his craft. The public and media reacted in panic. Newspapers, hungry for circulation, sensationalized every aspect. Salacious headlines dominated front pages, and before long, the murderer had a name that would last for generations: Jack the Ripper. The term originated from a series of threatening letters written to the police and newspapers, supposedly by the killer himself. Certain letters, such as the notorious "From Hell" letter, were delivered with horrific tokens, such as a fragment of human kidney. Whether the letters were legitimate or pranks remains questionable, but the public psychological effect was instantaneous. Terror hit London, and hysteria spread quicker than the news. The killings put police in a whirl. Hundreds of officers poured onto the streets. Suspects were questioned, doctors consulted, wild speculation abounded, and drawings of strange men in cloaks or top hats turned up everywhere. But for all the efforts, stakeouts, interviews, frantic appeals over the media, no one was apprehended. No one was brought to trial. The killer was at large. Jack the Ripper didn't kill merely by murder. He embarrassed the police, taunted the public, and showed just how weak the British Empire really was, even in the center of its capital. Queen Victoria herself was allegedly angry, demanding the Home Secretary take quick action. Then, with the horrific murder of Mary Jane Kelly, the most violent of all, the killings ceased. No further bodies. No further letters. Silence. And in that silence, a myth arose. Jack the Ripper was no longer just a murderer. He was a symbol of how even the most heinous creatures can blend in with our society. The mystery itself evolved into a social mirror reflecting the darkest fears of society: poverty, misogyny, mental instability, and institutional breakdown. The haunting questions persisted: who was he? How did he disappear? And why did the greatest empire on earth not apprehend him? What the public never learned was that police had a suspect all along, a man in plain sight. It would take more than a century and one blood-stained artifact to return his name to light. In the late 1880s, if you were to stroll through the misty streets of Whitechapel, you might have unwittingly walked by Aaron Kosminski. Unobtrusive and quiet, maybe holding scissors outside a barber shop, he merged comfortably into the London fog. To everyone else, he was another immigrant in a city that tolerated none, attempting to eke out a living. To a tiny team of detectives in Scotland Yard, however, he was a man of profound suspicion. And in 2025, his name would again come to light, this time as the most likely candidate to have been Jack the Ripper. Born in 1865 in Kłodawa, Poland, Kosminski escaped from Eastern Europe along with many Jews during his time, fleeing bursts of anti-Semitic brutality. He traveled to London during the early 1880s and settled in Whitechapel, an area that was plagued by tension and despair. The Jewish immigrant population there lived under the threat of constant fear and discrimination. Kosminski became a barber, a trade which, in retrospect, seems ominously fitting considering the delicacy involved in the use of a blade. What distinguished Kosminski was not geography, he was near each murder location, but a disturbing psychological profile that developed over the years. In 1894, Sir Melville Macnaghten, the Assistant Chief Constable of Scotland Yard, secretly designated Kosminski as one of 3 principal suspects. He said that he had a great hatred of women, with strong homicidal tendencies. This was not rumor, it was from the investigation's highest echelons. In spite of the strong suspicions, Kosminski was never picked up. The police had no hard evidence, no fingerprints, no tests for blood, no surveillance. It was a different time. Even when he was said to be identified in a secret lineup, the witness would not testify, fearing their words could stir up anti-Jewish hatred in an already tense environment. And so, the case cooled. Kosminski's mental health quickly deteriorated. By 1891, he was institutionalized after experiencing violent hallucinations and threatening his own sister with a knife. He was committed to the Coney Hatch Asylum, where records describe severe delusions, religious mania, and complete mental breakdown. He stopped bathing, spoke incoherently, and was never released. He died of gangrene in 1919, alone, confined, and largely forgotten. But was his quiet end the final chapter of a serial killer's reign? One disturbing factor that keeps resurfacing is Kosminski's profession. Victorian barbers were often expected to perform minor surgeries, bloodletting, wound treatment, even tooth extractions. Though Kosminski may not have had formal training, he likely had the practical experience to carry out the kinds of mutilations seen in the Ripper murders. His job might have given him just the right amount of anatomical knowledge to commit such brutal acts. In 2014, more than a century after the killings, a new lead emerged. DNA was reportedly recovered from a shawl allegedly found at one of the Ripper crime scenes. By 2019, scientists claimed that DNA on the shawl matched the maternal line of Aaron Kosminski. By 2025, many believed the case against him had never been stronger. But even with this new evidence, unsettling questions remained. Could a mentally disturbed man have outsmarted the most tenacious police force of his era?